Welcome to this explainer. If you've spent any time at all exploring self-improvement, mindfulness, or modern spirituality, you've definitely bumped into one very popular, almost universal narrative. It's this idea that killing the ego is the absolute ultimate and maybe the only path to true inner peace. Well, today, we're going to totally challenge that narrative. We're diving into the science, the psychology, and honestly, the hidden pitfalls of this whole pursuit.
We hear this mantra absolutely everywhere on the spiritual path, right? The message is just relentless. The ego is the enemy. It's framed as this grand illusion, the root cause of all our suffering, a massive barrier to the divine. We're basically told it's a monster that we have to wage a lifelong war against to achieve enlightenment. The whole idea is if we just meditate hard enough or detach enough, we can somehow start it out.
Okay, but let's take a step back and really dive into this. What if I told you that trying to crush your ego might actually be feeding a much stealthier, way more dangerous version of it? Seriously, what if by declaring war on a fundamental part of your own human psyche, you aren't actually stepping toward enlightenment at all, but instead you're walking straight into a massive psychological snare? To understand what's really going on, we need to look at the core conflict between two totally different perspectives. On one hand, you have modern clinical psychology, which sees the ego as an essential, foundational executive function. You literally need it to survive in the physical world. But then, on the other hand, you have the traditional spiritual view, which treats the ego as a pure illusion, just this stubborn obstruction to universal consciousness that needs to be completely destroyed. Let's break down the clinical side first. From Freud all the way to modern cognitive behavioral psychology, your ego is absolutely not the enemy. It's a vital interface. Think of it as the control center for your executive functions. It handles reality testing, boundary setting, and self-regulation. Without it, you wouldn't be able to delay gratification, plan for tomorrow, or keep your primal impulses in check. It's honestly like the psychological equivalent of your physical immune system. In fact, transpersonal theory, which kind of bridges the gap between psychology and spirituality, points out something really profound here. It argues that if you don't have a healthy, fully developed ego, trying to reach higher states of consciousness can actually cause psychological fracture. Some people even experience psychosis. It's a concept known as the pre-trans fallacy. Simply put, you cannot transcend a self that you haven't even fully formed yet. It's like trying to run a marathon before you've learned how to walk. Makes sense, right? And this brings us to a hidden, pervasive danger on the path of self-improvement. It's a phenomenon known as spiritual bypassing. See, when we try to kill the ego before we've actually done the hard work of healing it, we fall right into this trap, often without even realizing it. Clinical psychologist John Welwood actually coined the term spiritual bypassing back in the 1980s, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the act of using spiritual practices, beliefs, and all those nice-sounding platitudes to completely escape doing the messy, painful psychological work of dealing with our own trauma. It's using meditation or mantras not to wake up, but to go numb. So, what does this premature transcendence actually look like? Well, you'll see emotional numbing disguised as detachment. You'll see a severe phobia of natural, healthy human anger. You might even see what experts call oppressively enlightening behavior. You know the type, the person who tells you to just send them light when your car gets towed. They use spiritual platitudes to completely invalidate the very real pain of others, or even their own pain. It's super frustrating. When we bypass our deep wounds like this, we often adopt what the famous psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott called the false self. The false self is essentially a rigid, defensive mask that we wear to protect our damaged, highly vulnerable inner self. It's this facade that looks super independent and put together on the outside, but underneath it gently conceals a barren, hurting emptiness on the inside. And this perfectly illustrates what happens next. When you take that defensive false self and combine it with the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment, you give birth to something entirely new. Enter the spiritual ego. You haven't actually killed the ego at all, right? You've literally just given it a wardrobe change and a brand new vocabulary. Let's think about the stark contrast between the two. A regular ego is loud. It boasts about material success, good looks, or social standing. But a spiritual ego? It's sneaky. It masks its superiority under this aura of divine wisdom and feigned humility. Where a regular ego seeks external validation, a spiritual ego relies on an inner validation that's masked as enlightenment. It completely trades blatant jealousy for pseudo-compassion and deeply disguised judgment. So how do we spot it in ourselves?
Well, if you catch yourself feeling quietly special or more advanced than your friends just because you meditate, or if you get deeply frustrated with people who just don't get it, or if you use your spiritual practices to ignore your real-world problems, like a failing relationship or career stress, yeah, your spiritual ego might be firmly in the driver's seat. You're just clinging tightly to the image of being a spiritual person. To really understand why this happens, think about the metaphor of the ocean and the onion. Imagine the universe as an infinite, cosmic ocean of consciousness. We are all deeply connected to it. But the ego acts like the layers of an onion. It deceives us into believing we're these isolated, separate, purely physical entities. We are quite literally a limitless ocean that somehow believes itself to be a tightly wound onion. Crazy, right? So the million-dollar question becomes incredibly practical. How do we connect back to that vast ocean and move past this restrictive spiritual ego without destroying the very interface, our healthy ego, that we absolutely need to survive, work, and thrive in the real world? Well, transpersonal psychology offers a really beautiful, workable synthesis to this problem. It tells us we must not kill the ego. Actually, scratch that. It's more like we need to master it. And this mastery happens through a distinct three-step process: cultivating deep self-awareness, doing the difficult psychological shadow work, and finally transcending the ego's absolute control. Step 1 is self-awareness. First, we must become a clear vessel. This means bringing acute self-awareness to our ego's mechanisms. Instead of fighting your ego, you just observe its operations, its need to be right, its fears, its judgments, as objects of perception. You start to realize that the internal static and noise in your mind isn't actually you. By simply witnessing it without judgment, the ego naturally begins to lose its automatic grip. Next up is step 2, and this is the messy part: shadow work. This is the exact opposite of spiritual bypassing. Here, we descend into our own psyche to embrace the uncomfortable, irrational, fear-based settings we've spent our entire lives trying to run away from. It means facing our unresolved grief, old shame, and chronic tension. You actually use your ego to point out exactly what needs fixing, giving space to whatever arises. As the legendary psychoanalyst Carl Jung so profoundly stated, you do not become conscious by envisioning figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. True consciousness requires facing the darkness. We have to integrate our unhealed trauma rather than just romancing the light. We have to be willing to feel the heat of the fire, not just theorize about higher planes of existence. That is how the false self is finally dismantled. Ultimately, all of this builds toward step 3, true transcendence. Notice, I didn't say ego death. In transcendence, the ego isn't dead at all. It's just no longer the sole master. It's been taken off autopilot. You still have your boundaries, you still pay your bills, and you definitely still have an identity, but it is now serving a much higher expression of consciousness. You can essentially unzip the human costume when you need to, but put it right back on to navigate the world. I want to leave you with this provocative thought to really reflect on as you navigate your own journey of self-improvement. Look closely at your practices, your beliefs, and how you interact with others. Ask yourself, are you genuinely doing the hard, messy, real work of healing your human wounds, or are you just wearing a more enlightened mask? Keep digging, stay curious, and thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.